Hi, so we are the 5th Biennial Conference for the Philosophy of Science, and you came here with your presentation called Strategic Science Skepticism and the Epistemology of Disagreement. But before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh yeah, so thanks for the invitation. And what I can say about myself is I work in Munich at LMU Munich, and I work there at the MCMP, the Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy, a center that is focused on logic and philosophy of science and decision theory. I myself work in a field called general philosophy of science, and that's a field of science that doesn't focus on any specific scientific discipline, but talks about concepts and philosophical problems that come up in different disciplines, one could say. And there I'm interested in things concerning causation, explanation. Recently, I've been working a bit on the notion of scientific objectivity, what that is, how it relates to evidence and confirmation in science. And a little bit of an application of that is the topic of my talk at this conference here. And that has something to do with arguments that so-called strategic science skeptics use to undermine or criticize scientific claims.
So what sort of creature is the scientific skeptic, strategic skeptic about science?
Yeah, a strategic science skeptic is someone who, first of all, utters a criticism of a scientific knowledge claim or regarding a scientific knowledge claim. So to take a kind of well-known examples of that, historical examples even. So from the 1950s onwards, a prominent case of strategic science skepticism was an attack or criticism of medical research results. For instance, that smoking cigarettes causes certain diseases, for instance, or among them lung cancer. And one brand of science skeptics, mostly affiliated with or even hired by the tobacco industry, tried to criticize or undermine this scientific claim, smoking causes lung cancer, and the empirical reasons backing up this claim as well. Strategic science skeptics, and that's important for at least a rough definition of what this sort of skepticism is about. They don't just randomly criticize scientific claims, but they seem to criticize scientific claims in a way that promotes certain economic or political interests. So in the case of smoking causes lung cancer, so this claim was criticized clearly in order to protect business interests of the tobacco industry, and in that sense, the criticism has a certain direction, one could say. If you think about more recent cases of strategic science skepticism, then agents or skeptics who argue against climate science, that there is any climate change at all, or that human actions are somehow causally responsible for that climate change. If you deny that, and you do that in order to also promote certain business interests or some sort of political agenda, that kind of puts you into the group of science skeptics, I would say. At least as a first approximation of what I and other people mean by the term, and some other labels that have been used. Now, stop with that is, merchants of doubt is a term coined by historians of science, and so is agnogenesis, which is just a name for producing ignorance in the public about scientific results, and that means these skeptics want to not convince scientists necessarily that their science is wrong, but the public. Yeah, and that's an important feature of this sort of skepticism.
The examples you used, because tobacco companies and then the climate denialism, they do have this sort of association of something negative. But is there anything negative, like, inherently in this strategic skepticism? Because we know that science is not value-free mostly, and there might be some other values that might be more important than science. So is there a place for a skepticism that is not so negative as this,
Right. So that's a very fair question. And so maybe I can say a few things about it. So the first is, well, if you simply say what's bad about, or to be criticized about the claims of strategic science skeptics is that their claims are somehow value-laden. Yeah, that will be difficult if you are a philosopher of science who rejects the so-called value-free ideal. The idea that at least certain parts or stages of scientific reasoning should be free of moral, political, economic values and interests. So if you reject that, then you cannot say, what's wrong with science skepticism is that these people are driven by values. Yeah, so I think you have several ways to react here. You can say, well, either you criticize the values they are using. Yeah, that's, let's say, a moral argument against or reaction to science skepticism, or you can say, well, it's not directly the values that are problematic, but it's rather the case that science skeptics are driven by, say, business interests of their employers, say, for instance. These business interests lead science skeptics to even systematically make certain mistakes. And then the philosophical criticism is really about analyzing what these mistakes or errors are about. And that's what I'm interested in. Yeah, so I'm interested in looking at what is fishy, erroneous, wrong from an epistemological perspective with the claims and arguments that science skeptics make. That's more my line of work, but this other line I just briefly sketched, kind of criticizing the values that drive science skeptics, that's also a perfectly legitimate philosophical enterprise, of course.
Well, what are the mistakes of the skeptic? Because you identified a certain argument, because skeptic is not stupid. He understands that there has to be some argument on the table. And from what I understand, the skeptic you're describing uses this sort of somewhat new branch of epistemology of disagreement.
So skeptics use a lot of different arguments. Yeah, not all of them are related to this notion of disagreement, but one is, and that's the one I analyzed in my talk at this conference. I would say, other philosophers might disagree with that the problem with the claims and arguments of science skeptics is that they somehow make false. So what they're criticizing is that scientists have good or sufficient evidence for a certain hypothesis. My line of argument is that they are making wrong claims in saying that. Yeah, so the support relationship between available evidence and scientific claims or hypotheses is not like the skeptics say it is. Yeah, that's a sort of general verdict. And to take one kind of well-known example that's more it's an argument that has been used both in these tobacco or cigarette and lung cancer cases of skepticism, but also in the case of skepticism regarding climate science, that skeptics have said, well, scientists have produced evidence, but the evidence doesn't prove with certainty, that smoking causes lung cancer, or in the other case, that human actions have somehow caused global warming. But science has to prove things with claims with certainty in order to have any warrant, so to speak. That's a brief version of the argument. A criticism of that is simply to say, well, that's just not what science does or even can accomplish. Yes, science, at least empirical science, doesn't prove claims with certainty. What it does is it gives us good empirical reasons, in the best case, to believe a certain scientific claim, or you can also talk about confirmation. Scientific research may produce evidence that provides more or less confirmation about a scientific claim. And that's what we can work with. That's what science accomplishes. That's what we need to take action, for instance, regarding, reducing cancer rates, or in the other case, to prevent or mitigate global warming. But the science skeptic somehow gets the picture of how evidence and scientific claims hang together wrong when demanding that we need to establish certainty. That's one of many arguments. It doesn't have anything to do with disagreement. But there is an argument that makes an appeal to disagreement, and interestingly, it is one of the few arguments that isn't directly related to empirical evidence. Let's call it the argument from disagreement, or the exploiting disagreement argument. And there, I think one can reconstruct the skeptical argument in the following way. So the skeptic says, directed at an audience of non-experts, the general public, that, if somebody finds out, or is told that there is disagreement about a scientific claim, then a person who gets this kind of information should be less sure, less confident about the truth of that scientific claim. Or the idea is, the more disagreement there is and you learn about it, the less sure you should become, or something of this sense. And what I try to do in the talk at this conference is to just talk about this one argument, the argument from disagreement, and to show that it rests on false premises, that it's not a sound argument.
So what is the response to this argument? Because it's intuitively appealing, right? I think for many people, thinking, oh, of course, if there's a disagreement, then I should be less confident in the claim. So what is the trick to destroy this argument?
So the trick, or the strategy, is to say, I rely there on a slightly formal tool called Bayesian confirmation theory. I think the details of that, the formal details, don't matter that much, but I would say the really philosophical point is, if I receive information, and the information is in the scientific community, it is the case that some scientists say that a certain hypothesis, say smoking causes lung cancer, is true, and they perhaps even all individually provide independent evidence for that, and that's what I'm told. And there's another group that is denying this. They present evidence that doesn't support this claim. And I have to say, this is sort of a bit a counter to fact scenario. Yeah, because that's not what it's like concerning smoking causes lung cancer. But let's assume that for a moment, of course. Then what I have to ask is whether the group that gives me the supporting information is overall more reliable than the group that gives me the disconfirming information. Yeah, and this concept, that you have to ask which source, which subgroup of experts is more reliable. That is, I would say, the gist of the argument. You can put that in more formal terms that are exported from probability theory. But that doesn't matter for the gist of the argument, really. But the point is something like, you should only lower your confidence in a scientific claim if you hear about a disagreement, if the group of people who provides counter evidence to the claim exceeds the group providing pro evidence, in terms of collective reliability. It depends on the particular situation. It depends on the claim. It depends on the research produced in the field, whether you should lower confidence, you should lower your confidence in a claim or not. It's not just whenever you encounter a disagreement, you should lose confidence in a scientific claim. And I think that's what the skeptics are suggesting in their argument. And I think this assumption is just false as a general rule.
Thank you for the argument. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.